everybody. We're so happy that you're here joining us for the evening to talk about fish and the habitat they need to live in here in the Deschutes Basin. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Kate Fitzpatrick. I'm the Executive Director of the Deschutes River Conservancy. And for those that don't know who we are, we were formed in 1996 by the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, irrigation and environmental interests to restore stream flow and water quality in the Deschutes Basin. We do that through collaboration and incentive-based tools, and we've been successful with our partners restoring over 350 cubic feet per second to the basin's rivers and streams. We still have a lot of work to do, and so we're going to continue to be hard at work trying to deal with the challenges that lie ahead of us. To start, we want to thank our sponsors tonight. We have RAB Lighting, woohoo, the Roundhouse Foundation, the City of Bend, Sun Country Tours, and Hand in Hand Productions, Matt in the back, who helps us live stream these and make them available as videos for the website later. We love that you're here. If you care about fish, this is the right place to be because they need stream flow, and that's at the heart of our work. We actually rely on community support to put on these presentations and keep them free for the public, as well as to do the work we do. So if you want to go to the next slide, this is just a really easy way for folks to get involved. This is our monthly membership program called the InStream Collective, and there's a postcard you can check out with a QR code, and basically it's grounded in your household water use, and so you can acknowledge the water you use and give back for a really modest amount starting at $12 a month to help restore the flows that we all depend on in the rivers. So please check this out. On to the program. I'd like to introduce our expert panel for the night. We've got two pros here in the fisheries world. We're really excited to have their expertise. Facilitating tonight is Lisa Seals, who's got a PhD in natural resource management and is a program director for the DRC. And then Megan Hill is a fish biologist and manager of biological services at the Pelton Round Butte Hydroelectric Project. And we have Jason Wilcox, is the Fisheries Program Manager for the Deschutes and Ochako National Forest and Crooked River Grasslands. So with that, take it away, Lisa.
Thank you, Kate. All right. Thank you all for being here. I feel like there are a lot of new faces in the audience tonight, so I'm just curious. Raise your hand if this is your first Raise the Deschutes event. Okay, the lion's share of you. Awesome. All right. Well, welcome. We're really happy to have you. We are tonight going to talk a lot about fish, and I have to say, even though, as Kate described, I eat, sleep, and breathe the flow restoration piece of our work and rivers and hydrology all the time, fish, even though I know that's a big part of why we're doing what we're doing, is for the ecosystem. But fish are somewhat foreign to me, so I am going to learn right along with all of you today, and my job tonight is going to be to ask probably a lot of really silly questions to just define some really basic things so that we all are on the same page. So without further ado, I just want to go ahead and describe our beloved Deschutes Basin that is hopefully somewhat familiar to most of you, but just to kind of orient us all to where we are. So the Deschutes Basin, as you can see on the map up here, is the second largest basin in the state of Oregon. It's about 10,000 square miles. Do you guys know what the first largest basin is? The Willamette, yes, our neighbor immediately to the west, both draining to the Columbia. The geography in the Deschutes continuously breaks my brain as we flow from south to north. So when you talk about downstream, you're actually talking north, and upstream being south. Very important piece of the work that we do at the Deschutes River Conservancy. The DRC was formed in partnership with the tribes, and so I like to sort of start out presentations by letting everyone know that the vast majority of the basin is actually lying on the ceded lands of the Confederated Tribes. So you can see the white area in the map up there is the ceded lands, and the blue area is the Deschutes, the basin that overlays it. And then the little orange piece is the reservation. So important piece there. And then this is a map that you are going to see a lot more, but just kind of hones in on some of the specifics of the basin. Again, headwaters are in the south, at none other than Little Lava Lake, flows through Crane Prairie and Wickiup, which are both reservoirs that we use to store water for use in irrigation districts for irrigating basically all the land up this way. So what brings us all here today, besides just to talk about fish, is that, as many of you are probably familiar, our rivers and streams have been pretty altered by humans for the last couple of 100 years. Specifically, lots of people came here in the mid-1800s to resettle the area, and they were driven here by essentially the promise of a new lifestyle that involved irrigation, right? So that means taking the water out of the rivers and spreading it across the landscape so that the desert could bloom, right? And literally people came for miles to homestead and to grow things, and draining the rivers was part of that equation. Again, no ill will, but that is just essentially how development occurred. And none of us would probably be here today if things hadn't unfolded the way that they did. However, that has had, pretty drastic impacts on our rivers and streams. And much of the work that we do at the Deschutes River Conservancy, in partnership with all sorts of good folks like the ones sitting up here today, is trying to restore some of the flows that have been appropriated for irrigation, or essentially diverted for irrigation. So again, before the Deschutes River Conservancy was formed in 1996, almost 30 years ago, the Deschutes River had almost 98% of its flows were diverted for irrigation. Waichus Creek, running through Sisters, would run completely dry 2 out of every 3 years. It was not uncommon to find yourself at that city park right there in Sisters and not have one drop of water in that river. And then the Crooked River also extensively diverted, only a trickle that you would see through Smith Rock State Park. So as Kate already alluded to, we have been working tirelessly with all of our partners for the last 30 years. That includes all the irrigation districts, all the cities and states and counties and agencies, federal and state, the environmental interests, the tribes, to restore flows. And we're doing that through a collaborative approach that is not, winners and losers, but really trying to make sure that the agriculturalists have all the water that they need to grow crops, the cities have all the water that they need to grow, and also that we change these stats and we actually have water in the river, because it turns out it's pretty hard for fish to survive if we if we don't have any water. So so with that, I am going to turn it over, I believe, to have these lovely people talk a little bit about the fisheries, which is, the way I like to think about fisheries is a lot of the catalysts for what we do are the ecosystems and the fish, right? So oftentimes that comes in the form of an endangered species or the reintroduction of a particular species in an area, and that catalyzes a lot of the work that we do, including much of what we're going to talk about tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over here to Megan to start by talking about anadromous species of the basin, and I'm going to ask her to start out by really simplifying it, because I know most people, especially if you all are, I should have asked how many people are fishermen in this group, but you guys probably already knew this, but just kind of defining for us what it really means to be anadromous.
I'm waiting for the green one.
Just go for it.
Okay.
No?
No. Okay. I think we're good. Okay. So anadromy. So anadromous fish are fish that spend a portion of their life in freshwater and a portion of their life in saltwater in the ocean. And so for the fish here, that means they're going to spawn in the freshwater. They're going to go out to the ocean to grow, feed, eat, and then they're going to come back to complete their life cycle in freshwater. So these are the big four for the Deschutes Basin, and we're going to kind of walk through each one by one and kind of talk about their similarities and differences. And in general, we're going to kind of start low in the basin and work our way up to Jason, who's going to talk about some of the resident fish.
And when we say low, we mean north, just to confuse you all some more.
High on the
So in the lower river. I am just curious, can I get a show of hands how many fishermen we have in the crowd? Okay, so like a good, great, yeah. I know, right? Totally. Okay, well, I'm going to be learning from you all too then. All right.
Okay, so want to start with fall Chinook. Fall Chinook are an extremely important species to the Deschutes Basin as a whole, both from an ecosystem perspective as well as being culturally significant for the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. So fall Chinook tend to be main stem spawners, and historically were found sort of in the main stem Deschutes, kind of lower in the basin, and so that's what you're seeing for that highlighted section. I'll provide a disclaimer here that fish do not follow our rules, and so certainly there were fall Chinook that occasionally went into Waichus or some of these other areas. What we're kind of talking about is sort of the norm or the average, but fish never follow the rules when we're talking about resident anadromous and distribution, so just providing that caveat. Fall Chinook are somewhat unique compared to the other fish that I'm going to talk about, in that they don't spend much time in freshwater before they migrate out. So fall Chinook are born in the main stem Deschutes River. They usually spend about 3 months-ish before they head out to sea. And so they're not overwintering. They're headed straight out to the ocean, where they're then spending a longer time, for the most part, compared to other fish, and then coming back. And they tend to be our biggest of the anadromous fish coming back.
Are we talking years? I mean, when
yes,
you say they
they're
migrate
spending
out quickly. And
2 to 5 years in the ocean.
2 to 5 years.
Yeah,
Okay,
they're spending
all right.
quite a while. And they're coming back quite large, and in big numbers. So the fall Chinook run for 2024 into the Deschutes River was estimated at about 44,000 fall Chinook. So huge numbers of fall Chinook. The spring Chinook, steelhead combined don't measure up to the fall Chinook, which is why they were historically so important and why they're so important to the ecosystem as a whole, because they're bringing back those nutrients. And are a huge contributor. Yes, I can tell.
I have another silly question. Fall Chinook, do they get that name because that's when they spawn, or that's when they come back?
Yes, they spawn. So peak spawning for fall Chinook in the Deschutes is October-November timeframe.
Okay. So their name comes from when they're born, kind of.
When they're spawned.
When they're spawned. Sorry,
Yes.
When they're spawned, not born.
Yes.
Yeah, we're going to get to fish life cycle shortly.
Okay.
Which is important for me, obviously.
Should we talk about spring Chinook?
Yeah.
So spring Chinook, same species, it's just a different life history. And you can see that the spring Chinook distribution looks a lot different than the fall Chinook distribution. And spring Chinook are the first of 3 species I'm going to talk about that are part of the reintroduction program. So I don't know if you can highlight it, but in the 1950s and 60s, dams were constructed by Portland General Electric on the lower Deschutes, and they basically...
Oh, wait.
Okay.
I really struggle with this particular technology. Okay, we're highlighting Big Falls, yeah? Is that what you're...
No, we're highlighting the Pelton Project.
Okay.
Lake Billy Chinook.
Got it.
We're highlighting
Okay.
a lot, but...
Okay.
So dams were constructed about 100 miles upstream of the Deschutes River, the Pelton Round Butte Project, by Portland General Electric. Those dams create Lake Billy Chinook, which some of you may be familiar with, but they also became a complete block to anadromous fish, to fish that were trying to migrate up and downstream. And so from 1950s to 2012, there were no adults that were passed into the upper basin. So what I'm showing here is kind of the historic distribution for Chinook, as well as what's currently available to Chinook. But there was a big period when the upper basin was not available.
So effectively, during that period, everything would stop right about, if you guys can see Madras,
Yeah.
right about this zone, was what was there. That was where they spent time. So
Correct.
all of this area down south, upriver, was blocked effectively.
Yes. So spring Chinook, again, this is their distribution. There's a good spring Chinook run in the Warm Springs River, and then historically we had spring Chinook in the Crooked River, Wychus Creek, and a little bit of the Deschutes. So you see Big Falls pointed out approximately there. There is a historic barrier to anadromy, a waterfall near Redmond. And so we don't see steelhead, we don't see Chinook historically in Bend, like upstream of kind of Redmond area on the Deschutes. We do see them in Wychus Creek. Chinook probably are a bigger fish. They need bigger water, so probably the lower sections of Wychus for Chinook. And then the Metolius. The Metolius was kind of the big stronghold for Chinook salmon. And these...
Oops, sorry. Nope.
I was just going to say, these guys spend about a year in freshwater before they migrate out to sea.
So longer residence time in freshwater, and then do they spend an equivalent amount of time out at sea?
Our spring Chinook typically spend about 2 years at sea.
Okay, so a little bit shorter
they all
than the
have
fall.
the-
They all decide. They all make their individual choices about
This is
when
my
to come
theme.
home. Okay.
Fish don't follow our rules.
They don't follow our rules. Okay, but
Okay.
in general,
Yeah.
a shorter time out, ocean going.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And spawning in the spring.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
All right. Next up is steelhead. So steelhead trout, another species of reintroduction, kind of same history there with the dams blocking the upper portions of the basin. Steelhead distribution, primarily the strongholds are Wychus Creek and the Crooked River. Jason's going to talk about the Metolius and the resident fish there. And again, we would have seen a few steelhead there, but that's primarily going to be a resident area. And so that's when the big difference between sort of the Chinook distribution and the steelhead distribution.
Interestingly, it's considered a little too cold.
It's true.
Jason said, interestingly, because the Metolius is a little too cold. And I see we have a comment in the audience. I forgot to say this. We are going to have a fairly extensive question and answer period at the end of the presentation. So at this point, unless it's a clarifying question that we just said something that went whew, like right over your head, like acronyms or something, we'll ask you to hold questions to the end. So, Yep.
Yeah.
Big Falls is called Big Falls, and that is the technical official name of it, and it was the blockage point for all anadromous fish. So even though the dams impacted the fisheries, they were never up in this up/south river prior to the dams. Good qualifying question. That was perfect. A+.
Okay, yeah, so steelhead, and we're going to talk more about steelhead later. They tend to spend about 2 years in freshwater before they migrate out to the ocean, spend a couple of years at the ocean, come back to us. They start returning in the early fall, typically, so September timeframe. That run is pretty extended. Like we got a fish last week that was a steelhead, but it's going to peak kind of in the January timeframe, December, January, and then they're spawning right now, kind of towards the end of spawning right now.
Okay, so this one's breaking my brain a little bit. It's called
know.
summer steelhead, but it's not because it spawns in the summer. It's spawning now, or finishing spawning now.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just making sure that I'm keeping it straight. That's all. Because I always foolishly thought it had to do with when people would find them and catch them. Is
Yeah.
when their names came, where their names came from.
No, that's a good question, Lisa. And if you didn't have that question on the tip of your tongue in the audience, you should have. Because, why the heck is it summer steelhead if there's none of its life history that plays out during this summer? Well, it's actually nomenclature that references a much broader range of spawning season, and a lot of times summer steelhead and other drainages, including throughout a lot of eastern Oregon, the spawning does actually extend all the way into even June, into that summer time frame. So again, generalities, but there's some more local kind of time specific differences in this basin.
I'm also just going to go back to fish don't follow our rules.
That's my big takeaway.
I love
for
it.
you.
Okay. All right.
All right. My final species I'm going to kind of touch on this part of the talk is sockeye. So sockeye are unique from the salmonids in that they're the only salmonid that lake rears. So their life history in general is that they're spawning in freshwater streams. They're then gonna outmigrate to a lake where they're gonna spend a year-ish growing, and then they're gonna go to the ocean, and then they're gonna kind of make that whole migration back. And so in the Deschutes, historically, that lake was Subtle Lake. And Subtle Lake is actually one of 2 lakes in Oregon that historically had sockeye, Wallowa Lake being the other. And so the story of sockeye in the Deschutes Basin is kind of a long one. They, were in Subtle Lake. They spawned in Link Creek, and then they migrated downstream. As early as the 1940s, dams were constructed in the Subtle Lake area, and so that run got cut off pretty early. And then when the dams are constructed on the lower Deschutes, any remnant of a sockeye population became non-existent in the Deschutes Basin. They ended up landlocked, and they became a kokanee population that I'll let Jason talk about. But today those dams on Lake Creek and near Subtle Lake have been removed, and we have fish passage back at Pelton Round Butte. So there's once again that ability for sockeye to access their whole historic range in the Deschutes.
Okay, so I'm just going to clarify. So a sockeye and a kokanee are essentially the same species, except for a sockeye is going out to the ocean to do its thing, and a kokanee is going to be a landlocked, considered a resident fish. Resident meaning they don't go out to the ocean to do their thing, not to be confused with anadromous. These are the things I'm learning in this process.
Make it easy on you, Lisa. Just sea-run sockeye.
Okay.
SS.
Sea-run sockeye, I like it. And landlocked kokanee. Yeah, I know. You got something else for us, or
No, just
okay.
turn. I'll leave it at that. Hopefully that's not too much for you.
Okay. All right. But this is where I feel like the non-fish people, it's helpful because I've heard about all these things. And I mean, honestly, like people throw out kokanee. And then again, you're going to talk about trout and steelhead, and they have a similar situation going on. But we'll get to that. I don't want to get too far ahead. But okay. So sorry, were we good?
We're good.
Okay, all right. Okay, so with that, we have finished the portion of the production this evening, at least for now, where we talk about anadromous fish, meaning those that leave the basin and head out to the ocean. And now we're going to talk about resident fish, which I learned not tonight, but when we were prepping for this, that they just hang out in their home waters, and that's what makes them residents, right? Jason?
Generally, yes. Though fish break the rules, and as you heard here from Megan, just to make things extra spicy and interesting, Mother Nature's beautiful that way. Yes, we do have conversion that can take place, like we just heard from Megan there, where we'll have species that is entirely landlocked and physically unable to become sea-run for even decades, and in some cases centuries. And I think a number of anglers in this room are probably familiar of some amazing stories where we've had the landlocked kokanee or landlocked sockeye for decades, and then boom, dams are removed. Even over geologic time, this has been found to occur, and then you get this reversion back to some subset of that landlocked population now experimentally working its way downstream and trying to get to the ocean, and that anadromy returns, or that sea-run expression of their life history, or their life cycle goes forward. And the reason for that, of course, is how do you get large and how do you survive drought conditions? Maybe you get out to the ocean where you got food and you got water. Sure, you have threats out there, but it's an interesting story that also is found with steelhead and rainbow trout, or in this case, redband, that I'll speak to. It's more of a local kind of adapted rainbow trout to this arid high desert landscape. So going to go into some of these non-sea-run or resident fish species here. I'm not going to speak to every last one on the screen here, but I'm just going to throw it out there. I like interactive conversations among the anglers in the group. I'm not going to go to a game species here. Who knows the darkest colored fish on that top right of the screen? Anybody?
Top right.
Sculpin. Yeah, you got it. Mottled sculpin. You owe me a beer after the talk. That's great. You win. We have mountain whitefish there is in the center left. Center left, mountain whitefish. You want to talk about an equivalent to, in some respects, kind of the primary productivity feeder that provides a lot of nutrients and supports an important integral role in the food web. That's a non-game species that still a lot of anglers do pick up. That's mountain whitefish for you.
Even I've caught one of those. Just saying.
Oh, nice. Yeah, they can give you a little run if you get a nice one, for sure. And then we've got a number of more familiar species that I'll speak to in forthcoming slides. Not going to get into regulations or any of that type of the stocking piece. I'm, Forest Service here, but undoubtedly it's recognized that some of these species do have a long-standing history in this state based upon desired angling and recreational interests here. And so some of these are indeed introduced non-native, but they've effectively become naturalized. I think a lot of times we as biologists do talk about the quote-unquote new natives here. So I think overall I'll speak to that a little bit going ahead.
Okay, for the non-fish people in the audience, can we just tell us who we have on here? We don't have to go into details, but like, who's this guy?
Ask the audience. Yeah.
Oh, audience. What? Rainbow.
Yep, rainbow.
Rainbow trout. Okay, all right. Bull. I heard bull and brook.
All right, that's a great common point of confusion there because those are both char species, and they're very, very closely related evolutionarily. When we talk about their visual differentiation, how we differentiate them, the easiest thing on these beautiful depictions, this is courtesy of Joe Tomoleri, by the way, famous, probably the most famous fishery illustrator. You're looking at those light spots on a dark background there with the bull trout, but they're round spots as opposed to the brook trouts in your bottom left, and that has the worm-like back of that fish, that dorsal fin, that top of the fish there. You're seeing what are called known as vermiculations. Drop that at the bar, you'll get no attention, period. It's worm-like depiction there on the back there. So note that as one of your key ways to tell between the two species.
So this is the brook trout and this is the bull trout.
That's correct.
Okay, all right. This one, that's a beautiful fin.
Native to eastern United States, east of the Mississippi, and again, pretty well established here in Central Oregon since being stocked by the state over really about a century ago.
Is this our friend the kokanee? A sockeye?
That does indeed look like a sockeye right there, and that's where we've got a beautiful transition going on in Subtle Lake that I'll speak to in the next slide between kokanee and now starting to get their sea run anadromous.
All right,
variant.
last but not least, apparently not for any of you. Oh, you gave it away. I was going to say, apparently for me, what are we looking at here? But Jason gave it away. We got brown. Okay, so bull, brook, brown, rainbow, all trout, kokanee, sculpin, and whitefish.
Not all trout.
Well, no, sorry, I meant the bull, the four I mentioned first. The rainbow, the bull, the brook. No? Okay, oh my God. Okay. Okay, okay, that's a laugh.
Generally for the audience here tonight, we'll just go with the rainbow, brown, brook, and bull as our trout species, and then we have a whitefish and a sculpin and a sockeye that is now returning here after being landlocked in Subtle Lake, and that tees me up for the next slide here. So Subtle Lake, this is a pretty sweet storyline right here. I'm not going to speak a lot about bull trout here, other than to generally say that, as we heard before, we have Lake Billy Chinook. That's a known world-class bull trout fishery. It's the envy of most of North America and beyond when it comes to a legal recreational fishery for bull trout, whereas this species is threatened on the endangered species list and struggling and imperiled in a lot of other drainages throughout its range. Its range extends, all through the Pacific Northwest, Idaho, Montana, down into some of the Great Basin area. Here we have a world-class fishery that's really based out of the powerhouse that is the Metolius River. It's one giant spring-fed system, world-class when it comes to fly angling, and it's producing such cold water that, again, steelhead trout steelhead trout
This right here.
actually do not thrive in the Metolius. It's a little too cold for their preferred growth rates. They can move up there where they're actually raised some out of Wizard Falls hatchery there, but as far as a natural historic run, it was bull trout dominated, and then spring Chinook also, as Megan said. Moving up into Lake Creek, we had those dams that Megan mentioned removed over the past over 10 years. ODOT removed a huge one there that you guys drive over all the time, a bridge that's now over Lake Creek. That was a pivotal restoration effort right there, complemented by Forest Service restoration that was done to improve the habitat of Lake Creek as Subtle Lake transitions at its mouth out into that riverine system there. Pairing those two together and all the in-stream flow restoration to improve the overall availability of navigation in Lake Creek, voila. 2018, we had our first confirmed lake trout caught by this angler here, and we've had several other confirmed bull trouts since then. So it's a pretty magical storyline. I'll say that yes, with some of the desirable species that new passage supports, sometimes you do get some less desirables or arguably less desirables. So we have smallmouth bass also starting to expand their population there in Subtle Lake, but that's for another conversation.
Jason, I'm curious, when did the removal happen, or when did the restoration happen that facilitated this 2018 photograph with this?
I don't recall the exact date of that. It was I want to say around 2012 in that ballpark.
That's
somebody else
perfect.
might know, but
Okay.
it's
6-ish
in the last
years.
yeah,
Okay.
it's been a pretty successful restoration story that is all started with, again, if we have an increased flows and then we can get ODOT to sign on because they're advancing taxpayer dollars. Hey, the juice is worth the squeeze to convert undersized culvert that was a barrier to passage to a upsized, very expensive bridge. To do that was motivated also by the structural dilapidation, but it sure doesn't hurt to have the recognition that we've got the flows, we've got the habitat here. It's going to be worth it to build something that's fish passage friendly.
A win-win for fish and bridges.
Gotta love it. Yep. And we do that a lot. It's a mutual benefit. So redband trout here. This is the resident type of rainbow trout or resident version of steelhead, and it's rainbow trout that is adapted to this high desert, more arid landscape here that we find throughout a lot of, not just Central Oregon, but again, throughout a lot of the east side of the Cascades, Great Basin, up through Montana, down to even into Nevada and Northern California. It's very ubiquitous species, and it's one I'll speak to quite a bit here in these forthcoming slides because it is so ubiquitous, and it's therefore somewhat of a bellwether to how our overall fisheries are doing. So kind of a busy slide here, but we're looking at 3 of these primary species. I've been talking about the rainbow or redband, mountain whitefish, and brown trout life stage calendar, if you will. And when we often primarily focus our spawning surveys on, and I'd like to zoom in on those 2 circles there, really upstream of Bend there, we're really looking at moving into, in the next month, and all the way into June, quite an extensive amount of red survey work where it's kind of at a peak spawning time for redband. Whereas you move into, so that's redband or rainbow, spring spawners. You move to the fall for whitefish and, again, brown trout. Fall spawners, I think a number of folks in the room are familiar with that, and we're looking at right around when you guys are thinking about your turkey dinner, we're out there in hopefully a lot of nasty weather and rain, if we're lucky, doing these red surveys. Red surveys, what's a red spawning nest, fish egg nest, if you will, breeding in the gravel, spawning, reproducing with their eggs buried in the gravel, and I'll speak to that in the next slide here as to why we're interested in these reds.
Okay, so again, silly question. All red bands are rainbows, but not all rainbows are red bands.
You got it.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I'm just making sure that I'm tracking. Okay, here we go.
Well done.
Spawning reds.
So yeah, the spawning behavior of, this is both salmon and trout, right? A number of us here are probably pretty familiar with this. We see, and maybe have even, heaven forbid, trampled a few of these unknowingly when you're out there angling, especially because these gravel beds are commonly excavated, as you're seeing in that cartoon graphic at the top there, often at the downstream end of a pool, known as the tail out, right? That's where you have that hyporheic flow, is a big word, but it's that sub-gravel flow of water that's flowing through the gravel. That's where the oxygen and cold water is piping into this gravel nest of eggs, keeping them incubated and oxygenated while they're growing to a size that then results in the alevin, or the very earliest of fish kind of juveniles coming out of the gravel. So you're seeing 2 reds there at the bottom. What we're looking for is what you kind of see, a couple different things there. You've got a obvious different coloration of the gravel because more of the algae covered rocks are turned over. You'll sometimes be looking for, as a biologist implementing one of these surveys, looking for that excavation kind of concave dip in the gravel, and then also looking, if you might, Lisa, point to that downstream end of those, you'll see gravel will kind of get washed down and out of those areas. That's a red for you, and that's what we're counting as a indicator of the fish population health and distribution.
All right, so it's the downstream end of a pool generally, where the water gets oxygenated again, but it's not.
That would be one of their preferred spots.
All right, but they don't follow the
rules.
rules.
But they by no means follow the rules.
We're talking in massive generalizations right
Yeah.
now. Okay, and the different colors in the gravel is a real clue for you biologists that something's gone on here. The fish have done their work. Yeah. Okay.
And the size of the gravel.
Yep.
Oh, and the size.
Yeah, speaking of the size of the gravel, not to get too overboard in this, but you're generally looking for that range of kind of quarter size diameter to golf ball size diameter would be really preferred by your redband and your steelhead. A little bit larger as you move into some of these larger salmon species, undoubtedly Chinook.
All right, so you're talking about the individual size of the rocks, not the size, because I'm kind of curious just how big of an area this might be when you talk about size. Like, are we talking about just the area like right at our feet, like a couple feet? I mean, how big is the spawning red?
They can vary, of course, but as you would imagine, redband reds are going to be smaller than steelhead generally because they're usually about 1.5 to 2 times the diameter of the length of the fish. That is the fish.
Smaller fish, yeah, smaller reds.
Yeah, like the fall Chinook reds are very large. Like you can see them on Google Earth if you look at the areas downstream
really?
of re-reg. Like they're giant spawning beds and just areas. So like
That
it is
is
quite a
amazing.
range.
Okay, that is incredible.
Go
And
look
then-
at Google Earth.
So bigger fish, bigger reds, bigger fish, bigger rocks. They can actually deal with bigger rocks. Okay, smaller fish are dealing. Okay, thank you. I'm learning so much tonight. You guys can probably tell. So moving on.
Yeah, good questions for sure. So in addition to the spawning sites as being one of the ways that we're monitoring these fish populations, and we'll get into some of the numbers and trends here in a few slides. We also commonly do snorkeling, get paid to snorkel, usually at night, and that's not for the abuse of masochistic fish biologists wanting to freeze their you-know-whats off. It's actually, we tend to have more sightings of fish. They're usually more visible, spotlighting them at night than if we were to do that during the day. And Tumalo Creek here, just outside of town here, for those that, and maybe you can orient there on the far east side of that slide, you got Bend here, and this drainage here of Tumalo Creek, for those that might not be privy to it, you got Bridge Creek and Tumalo Creek. That's your municipal water supply. That's where you're getting your water for the most part here in Bend, if you're not on a well, that is.
Which is treated at the Outback facility and then distributed. So an important waterway for everybody in the room, including the fishermen.
Absolutely. I always encourage folks to know where their water is coming from out of their tap, and to share that with their neighbor. If you're not sure what to start a conversation with your neighbor about, try that. And,
Really good one.
or not. I don't know. So this stream here is pretty special, being a municipal watershed. There's been a long-standing partnership that we've had with the Forest Service and the city of Bend here. A beloved sponsor of Raise the Deschutes here. That partnership has all been focused on studying the relationship between the municipal water operations, the waterworks here, and the fishery and the water chemistry, water quality in Tumalo Creek. And in general, we've had a control site since 2016. We actually had a little bit of work we did before we partnered with the city back in 2011, but we'll jump to the next slide here. And what we're looking at, just going to cut to the chase on this one, is that since 2016, the Forest Service has been heading up night snorkel counts of primarily focused on redband as the native species, but also have brown trout and brook trout in here. And the great news is that they're cohabitating quite in equilibrium. We have some interannual fluctuations, year classes age out. I think that's what's happening in 2024 with a little bit of a reduction there. But the main thing is they're coexisting. We're not seeing one outcompete the other. And most importantly, we're not seeing this area that's received a lot of habitat restoration as well as very smart flow management and sustainable use by the city, we are not seeing the very most competitive of these trout species, brown trout, take over the system. And it's generally believed that there might be a little bit of a thermal barrier, and they're not really keen to move up into that super cold habitat.
Yeah, those are not impressive brown trout numbers, which
Yeah,
is a good thing.
and we're fine with that. We'd like to have a diversity. Don't worry though; those that love the fish for brown trout will see them as winners in an upcoming slide. So monitoring of redband has been a longstanding partnership between Forest Service and Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife in the upper Deschutes Basin here. These highlighted reaches in yellow here are those long-term sites for assessing the spawning trends of redband.
And again, just to orient folks, we're looking at upstream of Crane Prairie. Am I correct here? Right here?
Yeah, we're all upstream of Bend right
Crane
here in
Prairie,
this
yep. And then
slide.
this is Wickiup Reservoir. And then we've got Lapine State Park. And then
Yeah, then we're moving up into Davis.
Okay. All right.
Davis Lake and all the way to Odell Lake there, Crescent Lake, all the way
Okay.
into Klamath County.
So now we're in the upper basin, far south.
Indeed.
Just to
So,
get it straight.
So cutting to the chase again here, we've got 2024 numbers here, starting from the top to going down for the Little Lava Lake at the headwaters of the Deschutes, moving downriver to Fall River. Those redband population numbers are the counts of individual reds in 2024, and those big kudos to ODFW's Ben Stout, who's been a champion of a lot of this work. He's largely funded by Central Oregon Irrigation District, who manages with ODFW mitigation fund to investigate the impacts of irrigation management in the upper basin. And a number of these slides here borrow from a lot of Ben's great work.
So almost 1,600 reds above Crane Prairie. So in that section that is not impacted at all by water management. Yeah, okay.
Just a quick clarification, Fall River, is that below the Fall River Falls?
The question in the audience was Fall River below the Fall River Falls? And I say this for the people there are people at home.
Yes.
So yes, the answer is yes.
So looking at this chart here, it shows overall the last 30 years, yes, we've had a lot of fluctuation in the number of rainbow or / red band here, kind of use them interchangeably at times, but the key is to zoom in on 2018 there, 1742 and beyond out to 2024. What are we generally seeing? We're seeing a pretty nice, albeit fluctuating, but pretty nice increase here in overall numbers of these rainbow red band here. And I think we'll speak in later on in the talk about how that's not generally considered to be just a coincidence. It's about water, believe it or not. Red band, like reliable flows, raise the Deschutes. So going to Fall River here, this is right there, you know, at by Lapine State Park area here. The main, I told you there was going to be a slide here where the brown trout were winning. Well, this is it. That's pretty much the cut and the chase of this slide here, is that there's been a long-standing preference and out competition by brown trout putting red band on their backs, and that continues to play out as is shown here. And if you have consternation about that, again, I'm not regulating the angling regs in Fall River.
I was just going to ask, should these people go out there and catch the brown trout?
Well,
We're not advocating for that, but
without a doubt, I wishy tight lines. Yeah. So moving downstream of Wickiup, we're moving further downstream here now, just downstream of Wickiup Reservoir. And this is a really telling slide here that really speaks to the Raise the Deschutes situation. Why might we have, if you can see in the upper right chart there, why might we have brown trout numbers that are just all over the map? That goes back to 89 right there, if you can't see it. And they're just up, down, stochastic, we say. They just zigging and zagging all over the place. Well, guess what else has been zigging and zagging? The flows in the Deschutes. Prior to the Deschutes Habitat Conservation Plan, and even currently to some degree, we have greatly spiking in-stream flows during the irrigation months that just started here in April. And they'll go all the way through till mid-October, played out for decades and decades, resulting in what for redband trout and even to brown trout, a lot of, especially redband being spring spawners, they would have their reds and their spawning gravel blown out and really struggle to take hold in the river. And then conversely, in the fall, when you've got brown trout spawning, guess what you got? What you're looking at there in the photo, really skinny water, right? Desiccation, exposed banks, loss of quality habitat, water warming up to unacceptable levels. So the result is that we have been trying to augment that. ODFW especially has been really proactive where they can, when they can, with putting gravel purposely into these various stretches, especially downstream of both Crane Prairie Reservoir and Wickiup here in past years, trying to jumpstart and kind of fill as sort of a stopgap in these gravel-starved reaches that where's the gravel, it's all behind the dam, right? It's been successful. We've seen some good spikes in spawning, as is seen in some of this chart here, but it drops back off once that gravel gets blown out. It's not really sustainable with the flow regime what it had been. So the more stable flows is going to really benefit us, and that's what we're seeing there. If you see in the far right, the redband trout, it's kind of hard to tell if you might zoom in, Lisa.
There, yeah.
There you go. It's guess what?
More recent.
More recent and
Yeah.
stable flows in the Deschutes. The fish appear to be liking it.
Yeah. So this is where I actually I know a thing or two, at least about the flow regime in this section. So we are looking at Wickiup Dam. That's what's in this photo right here. And this section of river below Wickiup, well, Wickiup was built specifically to hold back water in the winter months to serve irrigation needs in the Madras and Culver area for North Unit Irrigation District. So that reservoir holds 200,000 acre feet of water. And after it was built in, let's say, it was in the 40s, I believe, 1946 or 48 or somewhere in there, the Deschutes River used to be one of the most stable flowing rivers, naturally speaking, across the country. Because it's a groundwater fed system. So it's not reliant on runoff from, the rain and the snow. All that rain and snow melts and percolates into the ground and then discharges as springs that feed the river. So it used to have this very stable hydrograph. And then we built Wickiup Reservoir and we started storing water. And this particular stretch of river that we're looking at right now, which used to have naturally occurring flows, I want to say between 600 and 800-ish CFS year-round, would go down to 20 CFS in the winter months. So starting in about November, all the way through about now, we would have about 20 CFS in this section of river. And then when they open those gates of that dam to serve the interests up north in North Union Irrigation District, the flows would be upwards of 2,000. So again, if you're a red and have you built you're a red band trout and you've built a red, sorry, getting this right, I think, really hard to sustain and to bring your kiddos up, rear them the way that you might want to if your flows fluctuate from 20 to 2,000 CFS. So The work that Jason alluded to is a lot of the work that we've been doing with our partners. The Habitat Conservation Plan that is the result of the listing of the Oregon spotted frog and bull trout. Am I saying that right? Yes? No. Not bull trout. Help me.
No, it's primarily focused on
Brown.
Oregon spotted frog and then
There's a-
reintroduction of summer steelhead.
Steelhead? Am I not? Am I crazy? Okay, I'm losing it. So at any rate, we're working on restoring this stretch of river and essentially bringing back a more natural hydrograph. So the river levels will be coming up in the winter months. In fact, they already are. At this point, we're between 100 and 200 CFS flowing. In 2027, that number will go up to 300 CFS flowing in the winter months, and then eventually in 2033, I believe it's between 400 and 500 CFS. So those are pretty big jumps from 20, which is what we're looking at here in 1989 and 1994. And then again, the summer flows are also going to be coming down as a result of releasing that water in the winter months. So, all right,
Thanks, Lisa.
take it away. Oh yeah, here's our.
Yeah, we'll keep on this a little bit because this is why we're here, is to really talk about why we're all centered on flow regeneration here. We have a completely imbalanced river just outside of town here, and that's what you're looking at. When you have a hugely dewatered system in volcanic soils, in a system that has highly erosive banks to begin with, and then you start to have that 20 CFS to 2,000 CFS, cubic feet per second fluctuations, and then on top of that, you have a freeze-thaw cycle that further destabilizes the soils. This is what you get. You have I'll just say it, it's a horrifically disconnected river from its riparian area, and in the foreground, might not be able to entirely see it, but that was a kind of a feeble, well-intentioned attempt at adding some wood into the river. Many folks have probably floated by this log right here. It's connected still by a couple cables that come down from the higher bank there, but that's frankly not, that's just window dressing. That's not doing a thing for the fishery, right? What's going to do something for the fishery? Well, we could add all the wood in the world right now to this site, and it wouldn't persist. It wouldn't really do anything relative to what we need to do with the flows. The flows need to be restored first, so that's the key takeaway there. Build the flow curves back to something more approximate to historical, and then we will follow up behind with sequential, cost-beneficial, cost-appropriate investment of habitat restoration work.
That is the plan, and we're actually going to, if we can, hold questions until the end. But I also just want to point out that the vegetation that is in this photo is very indicative, actually, of a very stable river system. Like, you look at the conifers that are on the banks, and those are not riparian. That's not riparian vegetation. Those are plants that are not used to having their feet wet. So yeah, it just goes back to the stable hydrograph that existed prior to us managing the river differently.
So again, you raise the flows and then you get an increase in fish populations, or at least that's been our working hypothesis, but we got to be patient. And we've been patient here, and now we're starting to see a few indications of this, including between Wickiup and down working your way to Bend here. You can see Wickiup Reservoir in the bottom left here. This is a total of 8 out of 14 kilometers are highlighted in that yellow portion of the Deschutes. And this has been routinely electrofished or monitored, capturing these various native species, brown trout, and redband trout. We also have mountain whitefish and kokanee in here since 2018. And ODFW has taken the lead on this work, and they've fortunately started to showcase a biological response to the flow adjustments associated with the habitat conservation plan. Specifically, you're seeing, if you look like 2020 through 2022 roughly, you're seeing years in which the moving to the kind of the green, orange, and then into the purple there, brown trout and redband were just kind of making do, holding on there. And then what happened after that, the 23, we had started to have a good, decent storage over winter of flows or of water in the reservoir within Wickiup. Increasing flows there in 23 and into 24 have sure enough shown a beneficial response to the number of brown trout and redband. And then the last species there, kokanee, why did they spike in 2018? That was that unforgettable, first initial year of taking it on the chin of the, what you got to do sometimes to work through a process here of adjusting a paradigm. We drained down Wickiup Reservoir to pretty much base run-of-river flows, right? And that resulted in a discharge of the lake-rearing kokanee, and that was that spike in 2018, and thereafter that has subsided. So I'm going to pivot and kind of bounce completely out of that portion of the upper Deschutes and go right up near some of the other side of Wickiup Reservoir and Browns Creek. This is a primary tributary that supports most of those browns that folks love to target there in Wickiup Reservoir. It's an extremely cold stream system, and generally the good news is that regardless of what's been happening here in recent years with all the re-regulating reservoir use of Wickiup, its main natal stream that's supporting brown trout continues to produce, and that's what we're seeing at least through 2023 there. Pretty nice spawning use of Browns Creek.
Is it a coincidence that it's called Browns Creek? I'm just curious.
I believe it is, actually.
Okay.
I could be wrong, but I believe it's a homesteader, I want to say.
All right.
Yep.
Never mind.
So another major tributary to the Deschutes River here again. We're upstream of Sun River, the Little Deschutes River here. Going to speak to a little bit of the trends of populations of fish and some of the little bit of habitat work here. So the main takeaway in the Little Deschutes now is we do not have redband, period, in the Little Deschutes. At least upstream of Gilchrist, we had, according to our environmental DNA analysis, along with decades and decades of partnership with ODFW, trying to find redband trout in the Little Deschutes through more conventional means of electroshocking primarily. We have found that they're not existing up in this otherwise, very habitable stretch of river. The environmental DNA work that is shown in all these sample sites and the red dots here on this map was, if you're not familiar with that methodology, it's pretty standardized or commonplace these days. Water samples are taken and then sent into a lab, and the genetic material, the DNA of various species that aren't necessarily just fish species can be filtered out, and we try to extract that. And if it's there, that gives us more of a confidence that they're there, but the labs have not found redband data, at least through this 2020 and 2021 sampling. The takeaway here is, though, where we do not have native fish often can be a big motivator for addressing some of the reasons why we suspect there are no fish in the little redband and the little Deschutes. And the big one is fish passage barrier issues. So Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Upper Deschutes Watershed Council, and the Forest Service are actively having conversations, working through trying to prioritize a complement of both barrier removal project ideas as well as habitat restoration work, so we can hopefully have redband back up in here again.
Speaking of habitat restoration work, let's pivot a little bit and talk about what we've been doing to kind of help bolster these populations and restore not just the flows but also the fisheries.
So I'll close up my long-winded bit of the spiel here by just showcasing what some of the Forest Service restoration side of the house. And what you're looking at there on the left here is a document that's based on a very strategic approach that the Forest Service nationwide takes when it comes to watershed restoration. And by watershed restoration, I mean, true headwaters, terrestrial upland habitat treatments are as important to us as in-stream work. It's holistic. What we do with trying to make our forested lands more resilient to wildfire has as much to do with fisheries health, frankly, as does the in-stream wood placement that you're seeing here on the right by that excavator. So we work under this holistic strategy that assesses the uplands all the way down to the in-stream habitat of what's working, what's not working, where do we have imbalances, how might we be able to restore those imbalances. It goes all the way down into cost estimates of the work. Thank you, sir. And that's all under the watershed condition framework, and then that produces a watershed restoration action plan at the sub-watershed level. So you're looking at the Little Deschutes River here, just south of the town of Gilchrist on 97, if you know it. And from that document, ultimately translated to heavy equipment contracts in this case, and a whole series of other restoration contracts. And we were out here in 2019, 2020, putting a lot of these trees in the channel here to largely spread that water out, add a lot of rearing and pretty much complex aquarium habitat for our native fish species, and as well as a whole assemblage of other aquatic species. We have freshwater mussels that we're interested in, a lot of the Oregon spotted frog that was mentioned, et cetera, et cetera. So we're doing this strategically, three of these sub-priority sub-watersheds every 5 years on each national forest.
All right, you want to talk a little bit about techniques, what you're actually doing?
Yeah, so we got multiple complementary techniques here. It's not all Tonka toys. I love Tonka toys. I love the smell of diesel in the morning, but that I say that tongue in cheek, right? We need to be passive with a lot of our restoration work here. If we're going to stretch our restoration dollar, the taxpayer dollar, we need to be really thoughtful about what's the most appropriate tool for the task at hand here. You're looking at a couple different techniques that are more low tech. Yes, you have a hydraulic post pounder there in the upper left, putting in what's known as a post assisted log structure, or PALS. We're effectively trying to emulate what beaver have done across the landscape before they're really depressing eradication across North America. We're trying to build the building blocks for them to come in on the heels of us putting this stopgap in. So you're seeing those various approaches. You've got a different technique there. This is on the bottom right and left. You're taking a look at Deschutes Land Trust's Willow Creek Preserve landscape there. I hope a number of you have had field trips out there, and this is really the building blocks of bringing on the ability for fish to be able to spawn and then the juveniles to rear and eventually complete their life cycle.
Very important part of the process. So kind of going back to the DRC and the role that the DRC has played, not just a convener and a partner and all of these things. Obviously, we're not the fish experts, as evidenced by me this evening, but we are working to help restore flows that are integral to the habitat restoration piece. So just sort of showcasing the Deschutes Creek late summer flows we talked about earlier in the presentation. 2 out of every 3 years, Deschutes Creek would be running dry through the City of Sisters. And now, after the work of all of the partners and modernizing the irrigation district and all the things, we're seeing between 20 and 45 CFS running through Sisters in the summer months. So we've got that. And a lot of that work, I will say, was catalyzed by the returning steelhead and the fact that we were going to reintroduce steelhead above Lake Billy Chinook as a result of the relicensing of the Pelton Round Butte facility, which Megan is going to talk about here for a moment. So I like to think about, oftentimes a lot of this good work needs a catalyst, and in that case, it was the fish. So
It was Megan.
it was Megan. It's entirely Megan. And again, this is a partnership. Everything happens collaboratively. You know, the DRC works on the streamflow restoration piece. The Upper Deschutes Watershed Council does a lot of the habitat restoration and fish passage barrier remover right alongside the Forest Service. The Deschutes Land Trust often acquires land and conservation easements to actually make that restoration work possible. And then we also have, in the case of the Deschutes Partnership, where we worked on Deschutes Creek, the Crooked River Watershed Council as well, doing habitat restoration and fish passage removal. Fish passage, no, not removal. Fish barrier removal. Thank you. Yes, it definitely takes a village. So this is the work of the Deschutes Creek Canyon Preserve, and you can see sort of how it all has played out in 2015 in that July photo. Believe it or not, there is a creek in that photo. You can't see it, though, because it's been pretty much diked and straightened and is not really even visible, and removed entirely from its floodplain. And then in 2016, a lot of hard work there. I believe stage 0 restoration, bringing back the wood and spreading out the water across the landscape and reconnecting the floodplain. And then you can see the results in 2019 as things are starting to grow up there. I'm going to let you guys talk a little bit more about, this is phase 1 of that Deschutes Canyon project.
So not only do excavators just simply place logs into streams anymore. I think a number of folks are starting to see some of the more progressive, varied techniques. I talked about some of those before, but one that's been super pivotal on a number of different federal, private, state landscapes that it's been a centerpiece of a lot of what the Deschutes Land Trust and Upper Deschutes Watershed Council have been focusing on in partnership with the whole Deschutes Partnership Group, has been this concept of stage 0, where we're using heavy equipment to actually, instead of try to have water stored for a longer period of time and interact across and splay across the floodplain through building log jams, we're recognizing that after decades of attempting to do that in channels that were downcut and eroded, think about trying to do that again on the Deschutes main stem like I showed in that slide there, you're never going to get there. We're talking about both accelerating the pace and scale of restoration here and trying to play catch up in a way where it's the most high priority to do so. And when it comes to the Warm Spring, Confederated Tribes, the Warm Springs have been very appropriately vocal, I think, in saying, hey, let's see if we can bring back our native runs of fish here in a reasonable human lifetime and not something that's truly, centuries. We need to get real. So we've been actually employing this stage zero methodology across a lot of these projects, including Deschutes Canyon here, the Deschutes Land Trust acquisition and partnership, and Rimrock Ranch here, and that's involving filling the old channels that were diked and shunted for irrigation and agriculture purposes, just creating pasture. And once that is completed, we have water that is now distributed back across much of the historic valley width, and that's what you're seeing in this drone flyover footage from the Upper Deschutes Watershed Council. All that wood is placed in there to add more of that complexity. A lot of this is mapped out and really designed through a lot of detailed assessment. These are multi-year projects to plan, take many more years usually to plan than they do to implement, and then the monitoring begins. And don't want to completely steal the thunder, but we're pretty stoked that we might actually start seeing some real meaningful biological response to what's obviously a pretty instantly dramatic physical restoration outcome.
That is an elegant design. That is so beautiful.
Thank you. I'm biased, but yeah, I agree.
All right. So the outcome.
Okay, so we're gonna kind of zoom in and talk more about the anadromous fish again, and start with the kind of payoff, or one of the payoffs of the work that Jason was just describing, is that we're now seeing steelhead spawn in those areas. So the Upper Deschutes Watershed Council, the Land Trust, did some red counts earlier this year and have observed steelhead spawning in these areas for the first time really since the 1950s. So this is like a historic time. It's really cool to see these fish here. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about kind of that story in a second. I did want to talk about another kind of piece of this restoration that I think is kind of a cool story and talks a little bit about a kind of tweak to some of the restorations that we've been talking about. So this is sort of part of our adaptive management for the reintroduction to get more fish coming back to the streams where we're releasing them. And so you can see that when we started the reintroduction program, the smolt release program, we just released fish straight from the back of the truck into the creeks. And what happened in that scenario is the fish had no idea what they were doing and just swam immediately downstream. Disoriented, they spent less than a day in Deschutes Creek, for example.
Even though Megan shouted good luck and waved with a big smile.
Yes, we were.
Didn't work.
Didn't work.
Who knew?
You gave him maps and everything.
We did, but yeah. So our kind of next step with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and cooperation from the Land Trust and others was this very high-tech acclimation facility, which is simply some 2x4s and some hardware cloth, where we're putting fish from the truck into these pens in, I believe this is Ochico Creek, and we're holding them for a couple weeks. And so we're giving them an opportunity to imprint on that water so that they know, like, this is where I should come back as an adult. And we're also seeing that they're more likely to move out downstream. So the red lines are showing our collection at our fish collection facility from direct truck release, and that blue line is fish that have been acclimated. So we saw an immediate benefit from this system. But that hardwire cloth system is kind of terrible to maintain. Like, we're rolling those things down banks, and it's, they may have got washed out once or twice. It's not ideal. And so we've built some more kind of permanent facilities with the help of the tribes and borrowing some of their stuff from the Hood River. But we've also worked with the Land Trust and others to build kind of an acclimation pond. And so that's what you're looking at in this other photo, which is kind of a naturalized way that's supported by one of the PALs that we were talking about that helps kind of hold back the water. We can release fish into this pond, give them a couple weeks to acclimate, imprint, kind of become used to the system, and then remove some of that barrier material, and they can move downstream. So it's a neat kind of partnership between multiple groups, kind of learning through time and adapting some of these different restorations to help support these fish as we're getting the restoration or reintroduction program going. And then once we're successful, we're not needing to supplement with hatchery fish, it's pretty easy to kind of restore that to a truly natural system.
Very cool.
Is this the reason why so many fish have come back this year, Lisa?
You're punting this to
Oh.
me? I feel like that's a Megan question.
Yes, totally. No.
Taking 100% of the credit.
Yeah, so everything we've talked about today does contribute to getting fish back. And the number one most important thing is the boost we got from Mother Nature and ocean conditions. The ocean is a huge player for these fish. They're spending a couple years out there, and we've seen great steelhead runs in the upper Deschutes and great steelhead runs in the lower Deschutes. So it is a big collaboration, but we don't want to forget to give a nod to those ocean conditions. But what you're seeing here is the number of fish, steelhead, released upstream of Pelton Round Butte, so released into the upper basin since we started the reintroduction program. So the first adults started coming back in 2012, and you can see we've had between 50 and 100 fish essentially for up until 2022. Then we had 130, then we had 160. And this year we had 687 fish come back from the upper basin, and then we've additionally been able to add an additional 250-ish fish through the excess brood stock program. And so you can see there's kind of different colors in there. And the difference is the majority of fish spent time in the upper basin in those acclimation facilities, moved through our fish collection facilities at the dams, went out to the ocean, and then kind of came back. The excess brood stock fish are fish from Round Butte hatchery, so they're born on Round Butte Dam, literally. They kind of migrate down the Deschutes, come back. They're not needed at the hatchery because the hatchery already got all the fish it needs. And so we had the ability to augment our run this year and pass them upstream.
That's a light blue line.
That's the light blue
okay.
one. Yeah. So majority of fish were from the reintroduction program and moved through the whole system. That's a significant number, 950 fish, because that is the goal for returning salmon and salmon in the upper basin based on relicensing. So in the 1990s, there was a bunch of modeling done by kind of the collaborative group to look at how many fish could be sustained, how many steelhead could be sustained by the habitat available in the Deschutes at that time. And the number that modeling suggested was 955 steelhead. So we're right where we want to be. Hopefully, through all the improvements we're talking about, we can sustain more than 950 fish, and that's a modeled number. But we're kind of in that range of what we would expect for the Deschutes, keeping in mind that the Matoles didn't have steelhead, and a lot of the more groundwater streams in the upper basin tend to be kind of the resident fish. So extremely exciting.
This is really exciting. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
we can't take all the credit, but it's still exciting.
it's still exciting.
Yeah, you should all be super stoked right now, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so this is, I was going to introduce it, but this is kind of the, exciting stuff for us is right now these fish are spawning. They've been spawning for a bit, so we're out there looking for them, trying to document where the fish are spawning, where they're going. And Beth, one of our biologists, was able to get this really cool footage of steelhead actually kind of building a redd and spawning in the upper basin. This is one of many redds that have been identified by a number of people doing this work. And then kind of a cool thing about steelhead, not this. That's all right. No, you're fine. Okay. Kind of the cool thing about steelhead that I didn't mention earlier is that Some steelhead will kelt, so they will try to go back to the ocean a second time and make a second journey back to freshwater to spawn again. And so we've caught 35 of those steelhead so far this season, kind of doing that return journey and trying again. This poor steelhead, a lot of times I'll just mention in the video that the one there's quite fungused up. That one is not going to kelt, I'm fairly confident in. We do see, the natural life history of most steelhead, and certainly Chinook and sockeye, is that they die shortly after spawning. And so, they're putting all their energy, all their reserves into egg production, reproduction, and they become very weak and susceptible to things like fungus, which is kind of what you're saying. But it's all part of sort of the natural life history of these fish. So it's exciting. They're spawning now, and hopefully we're going to keep documenting these fish and keep them coming back.
Yeah, clarifying question in the audience was whether or not fish are wanting to go back to the ocean for a second time.
Some steelhead will, yes. So you don't see that with the Chinook or the sockeye, but with steelhead, a small proportion, probably 5 to 10%, will kelt, which is kind of what that life history is, and it'll go back.
It's the go-getters. It's the go-getters of the group.
It's normal behavior. Yeah, it's part of their natural kind of. Steelhead and resident rainbow are phenomenally diverse in their life history. I think like 27 different variations of like how they live have been documented, and that's just one of them.
Yeah, that's a way, if you think about it, so the whole survival of the fittest concept, if you want to have, some of the gene pool return from those fish that are strong enough to go through all that energy of making it up, spawning, and then out migrating back out to the ocean and back again, you're obviously looking at a badass, yeah. Good word.
The technical term for it. We're moments away from taking your questions, so we're going to do that in just a second. But before, I just want to let you all know like what's coming in the future. A lot more of this same work is happening, and there is a lot more work to be done. We already alluded to the fact that the flow restoration on the Upper Deschutes River is happening as we speak, and as soon as we get some of those flows restored in a more stable hydrograph, we're going to have a lot of work in the habitat restoration realm that also needs to accompany that work. Also wanted to make a nod to the Crooked River Basin, where we are working with partners to restore Mackay Creek. We're doing a big water switch program on the Mackay Creek, which is right above Ochoco Preserve. I think we removed the map, but an important stream for fish. And so we have, I believe there's a bunch of landowners that are diverting directly out of the creek there, and they are all going to leave the water in the creek and fully restore the hydrograph of that creek to its natural flows. But they are also going to get irrigation water from Ochoco Irrigation District, so they are still going to be able to farm on their properties. And this is a project that's actually been in the planning stages, in the works for, I believe, over 20 years. And we're anticipating breaking ground on that in the fall. And then, of course, there will be, I'm sure, restoration work forthcoming as part of that, as well as work that's already transpiring on Ochoco Preserve, which these guys can talk a lot more about. But long story short, it takes a village, all of the partners working together to restore flows, restore habitats, and reintroduce fish and make sure that they have what they need for a healthy life cycle. So I believe, there's Ochoco Preserve and Waichus. Or we did have a... Yeah, I give up. Just,
Go right. You said, sorry, keep going.
Nice. Yeah, it's Ochoco Preserve is in there. Yeah.
and Mackay is just north. It's the little blue line just north of Ochoco Preserve is Mackay Creek, where we're doing our big project. So I believe with that, we're going to start to take questions from the audience. Wait, hold on. One quick question. or not, we do have an audience at home, and this is being recorded for folks to view in the future. So we are going to ask you all to use microphones, and Alex is going to come around and hand you the mic. And yeah, so we'll start with you since you have the mic in your hand.
Yeah, right on. I don't remember you guys' names. I got here a little bit late. Could you guys remind us of who you are?
I'm Lisa. We've got Megan and Jason.
Where are they from? Where are you guys from?
Jason is Forest Service, Megan is Portland General Electric, and I am from Deschutes River Conservancy.
Well, thank you so much, Forest Service. Thank you so much, PGE. I know you guys are doing stuff on Willamette Falls down there with the native fishermen and making sure they have rights to be able to practice their traditional beliefs, and I appreciate that. But can you tell us a little bit about Ochiko Creek? Usually my friend and I would be hanging out and we'd be like, Ochiko Creek's at 5 cubic feet per second, and it just flooded like a lot of burns. Can you tell me about the differentiation between the water flows there?
Is that something you can take, Jason?
It's not so much my my lane or bailiwick there. Might you kind of clarify what you're looking for in the way of flows information?
Talking about it supporting fish habitat, and I was just wondering, usually it's running super low. It's always a super low flow creek, and all of a sudden it flooded burns.
Oh, and Burns, different Ochiko Creek, different basin there. Yeah, that would be outside of my area that I work in.
We did have exceptionally high flows in the Crooked recently, and I will say that is because we have had a really wet year. And unlike I described the groundwater fed system that is the upper Deschutes, the Crooked does not function that same way. So it is responding to runoff. And so when we're getting all that snow and all that rain and all that melt, that is directly impacting the Crooked. And in fact, the reservoirs on the Crooked River are flood control reservoirs specifically. So that is one thing to keep in mind when we talk about the hydrology, is that the Crooked has a very different hydrology, and you will see, naturally occurring peak flows that are really high, whereas that's something that is not characteristic of the upper Deschutes Basin. Okay. I'm going to let Megan take a question from our audience at home. The question is, can you speak to the genetic history of the returning steelhead? How many of those fish were natural origin spawners?
Okay. So as we talked about, steelhead were completely gone from the upper basin for, 45 years after the construction of the Pelton Round Butte Project. And so in order to get those fish back, we are using hatchery outplants to kind of start the process. Those hatchery fish are a Deschutes River stock, so they are fish that are from Round Butte Hatchery, which is located on the Deschutes. So they're genetically a Deschutes fish. They have been in a hatchery for many, many years, so they are distinguishable from a wild fish at this point, but they do have the Deschutes genetics. I think the second part of the question, it disappeared for me. Okay, thank you, is how many of these were natural origin spawners? We are differentially marking fish so that we can tell whether or not they're from that smolt outplant program, or if they are from fish that have spawned in nature. For this year, it's under 10 that came from fish that spawned in nature in years previous. And that's because up until this year, we've only had 130 fish. And so to be able to get those runs going, there just haven't been the fish there. So we're extremely excited to have enough fish that we can produce natural spawns, juveniles, and really kind of start that process of local adaptation.
Yeah, and I would say even with that extremely low number, back to what Lisa just said there, okay, 10, even a couple dozen, wild returning steelhead here relative to the couple hundred steelhead that outmigrated is a pretty healthy percentage. It's going to take a number of life cycles and a lot more of this habitat that we're putting online out there to try to build out more and more of the true 100% wild escapement.
All right. Other questions from the audience? Please. Oh, somebody's already got the microphone. Take it away.
My name's Matt Gatto. I'm on the Bend Paddle Trail Alliance. And I just wanted to note a thing that everybody should know about coming up in the next year and a half or so. Because of the success of the spotted frog and the minimum flows being raised in the river, there's a limited window in the next year and a half or so to get into the river and redo the floating trail on the side of the river. If they don't increase the ability for that to take more water, they won't be able to get into the main water park channel and redo. It's now been 10 years. They won't be able to redo any of the water park features if they don't have a way to put the water on the side of the river. And so it's very important as we get to that. Bend Parks and Rec has most of the money. There's probably going to be a small bond that we're going to talk about to be able to redo the water park. But if we don't do that in the next year and a half, we'll lose the ability to change the water park in the future. And all the work that we've done and all the millions of dollars of tourist traffic that we've brought into the water park might be lost because we won't be able to get in there and fix it. And it is 10 years old and it has some features that need to be fixed. Not for like better surf or whatever, but just like so that it doesn't break. So anyway, I just want to say that like that's a feature locally that we do need to keep an eye on. And when it comes up, like please put your money where your mouth is. Thank you. Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Thank you. I didn't hear a question, but thanks for that. Questions?
You talked about how Waichus Creek, the flows have increased, and I think also in the upper Deschutes Basin, but you didn't really go into how did you accomplish that? I didn't catch that. Can you give some specifics on how you managed to do that?
Yes. There's a whole, I feel like I could give a whole presentation on that alone. In fact, I have, but as many, and we'll probably do it again. But effectively, we use sort of three main tools. The first is irrigation modernization, and basically what that is working with our irrigation district partners to upgrade what is effectively 100-year-old infrastructure. So we're talking about hand-dug canals through porous volcanic basalt that leaks 50% of the water and requires people to divert twice as much water as what's getting delivered on farm. So we're working with irrigation districts to actually modernize their systems, as well as working with farmers to modernize from flood irrigating, say, to using sprinklers. So that's one of the tools, toolbox in our toolbox. Another one is sort of market-based transactions. So working with all of the partners to help make it easier for us to move water around. So for instance, if you have a person who has a very secure water right outside of Bend, and they're like, let's say they're not actually farming anything to make a living, and they have water rights, but meanwhile you have North Unit Irrigation District farmers up in Culver and Madras who don't have enough water to actually grow crops to bring to market. So we're trying to make it easier, essentially, for those folks to get their water rights to the folks that need it, and also at the same time restore flows, right? So when North Unit Irrigation District, they're largely reliant on Wickiup Reservoir was storage, and that is what's changed the hydrograph, is the reliance on that storage. So if we can get them live flow, like water that's actually passing the river in the summer months, instead of having them rely on the water coming out of that out of Wickiup, they're able to release more water in the winter and restore the flows in the upper Deschutes. And then the third bucket is collaborative basin planning. So it's effectively like all of the stakeholders, all of the partners constantly talking and working together to come together and come to these agreements and do the habitat work and make it all happen. So yeah, I think that's the quick and dirty summary I can give. But I'm happy to talk more about that and also point you in the direction of how to learn more about the tools that we're using to restore flows. Yeah. Okay. Let's see.
Yeah, I guess I'll follow up on that. The second bucket that you were talking about, the transfer of water rights downstream, how does the landowner get a benefit from that? Do they just get paid by how much water they're diverting? And then how is that being transferred upstream to keep water, raise the Deschutes, as
Yeah.
you're saying? And
Again, I wish I had a whole set of slides to talk about this.
I just need to come to your other
Okay.
talk.
You do. I can definitely, I can point you in the direction of resources to help answer that question. But effectively, it's the way that water rights work in the state is not downstream, upstream. It's actually who used the water first. So water rights are by a priority date. So in our basin, we have 8 different irrigation districts that have different priority dates. And the more secure ones are like the seniors, and the most insecure are the juniors. And the juniors are in North Unit, which effectively is the farthest north downstream. And they are reliant on that Wickiup Reservoir all the way up at near the headwaters of the Deschutes. So again, we're trying to restore that section of river just below Wickiup Reservoir, and that requires North Unit Irrigation District to forego some of their storage, right? They have to let more water go in the winter months instead of holding it back by that dam to be able to restore those flows. And so in order to do that, we're working with irrigation districts and patrons to free up water in the more senior districts. So the districts that have more secure water rights, like for instance, Central Oregon Irrigation District, they have one of the older water rights in the basin, and they're reliant on the water that just flows naturally in the river. And so every time we do a project, like a big piping project in Central Oregon Irrigation District, and say we save roughly 50% of the water, so we only have to divert the water the farm is using. We're not diverting water that is seeping into the ground all the way to the farm. All that water then can stay in the Deschutes River and get picked up by the people downstream. And they can use it in the summer months to grow food, and in the winter months, in exchange, they're able to restore that much more water in the upper Deschutes. So that's one way. And then the other way is we're not necessarily, we do somewhat pay patrons, but there are all sorts of ways, market-based ways in which people can transfer water rights. We have a leasing program that has been going on for a long time where if folks don't need their water, they can effectively lease it back to the river, which means they're not diverting it. And the benefit that they get from the leasing program is that, I don't know if you've ever heard of use it or lose it, but Oregon water law, you have to use your water right once every 5 years or it could get taken away. So people are oftentimes irrigating when they don't necessarily need to be, but if they lease their water in stream, then they get beneficial use. It counts. So they don't actually have to put that water on the ground. So that's an example. And again, I have and I will again talk about this more at length, but hopefully that helps answer some of your questions. Okay, cool. All right. Other questions in the audience?
I have a couple of questions.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Thank you all for the work that you do. I'm very grateful. I was born and raised in Oregon, and I kind of have like a 1990s view because I left and came back very recently. Some of the big topics at the time that I left Oregon were wild fish genetics, international gill netting impacting the ocean-going fish, and also the status of our aquifers here. So I wondered if you could speak to your concerns with gill netting, whether they be international or regional gill nets, on the impact of our fish that go to and from the ocean. And can you confirm we have 0% wild fish in our area based on the dams that have been in place for so long? Just curious what our wild fish genetics are versus hatchery in this region and the state of our aquifers. Thank you.
Those are 2 disparate questions. I'll let you guys handle the fish questions, and then maybe I could take a stab at the...
Do you have a specific species or all generally? Anadromous? Yeah. Anadromous taxa. Yeah, I think I would go back to, from a wild genetic consideration, I'd go back to what I said fairly early on in the hour and a half here, and that is that fortunately, Redband, as Megan said, are and rainbow are extremely resilient and very, they have a lot of plasticity, meaning that they do express a wide range of genetic diversity from at least several year classes to another series of year classes. I think that overall we're, as Megan said, gradually working back toward more of that expression of the wild-based diversity that the habitat affords over time and less of the raceway hatchery approach. So I think that we're on the right track to getting more of that wild cohort into the mix here. The gill netting piece, I think that's something that's really kind of outside my wheelhouse, but I appreciate the question.
Yeah, I'd add on the genetics piece a little bit. There is a whole genetic component to the reintroduction program, and we've, along with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Abernathy and the Forest Service, ODFW, done a bunch of genetic studies. The most recent one is actually out for kind of peer review right now, but should be out. And we're seeing a lot of changes. Like, we've changed how we stock fish, the acclimation and things to help reduce some of those genetic impacts on redband fish. And we're seeing the outcome of that in the most recent studies, where we're seeing kind of some, hatchery influence. We're seeing some fish that don't have, Deschutes hatchery stock in them and appear to be, as wild as our baseline is. And a real mix, but it's an ongoing story, and it's part of something we're looking at.
Other questions from the audience?
Thanks. Every few years there's this controversy here in Bend about the dams that form the Mirror Pond. Has there been some work done to make the fish passage easier going upstream through the dams that provide for power and diversion right here in Bend? Because it sounds like from what you're saying, we're getting more steelhead going upstream from the Bend area. Is that correct?
Steelhead kind of will stop at that Big Falls area right around Redmond. So we're not going to see anadromous fish this far upstream in the Deschutes. They weren't here historically.
Is there any work being done to create some fish passage through the...
So no anadromy, as Megan said, here upstream of Big Falls and Redmond area, but when it comes to fish passage, we still are very interested, as I said before, in the resident redband passage as well as other species. And yes, in short, without having a lot of the details myself, there's active work among a whole cohort of partners to work on improving fish passage at any number of these locations, whether it be hydropower or otherwise. But I defer to them to speak to the details. But yeah, you're spot on. It's a continued effort here to try to get passage upstream where we can.
So the anadromous fish are still blocked once they get to Bend?
So we have a native natural barrier that is a historic geologic barrier to steelhead and other anadromous sea run migration upstream of Big Falls on the Deschutes River, just north of, or south rather, of Redmond.
Yeah, so they've never been in this section of the river, in the Bend area. They never naturally, without any of our meddling, they never made it past Big Falls in Redmond. So that was where they stopped on the main stem of the Deschutes. So we won't see them anytime soon, Mirror Pond aside. So I think, yep, we have time for one more quick question.
Thanks all for the informative and fun talk. I have a question about kind of broader scale drivers, thinking about fire, climate change. As you're looking at the fish numbers, to what extent are you seeing impacts from those broader scale drivers, and to what extent do you anticipate them being influential moving forward? Thanks.
What's climate change?
Sorry, others on the panel can take that if needed.
Yeah, joking aside.
Hydrologic variability.
Yeah, multi-decadal weather patterns. We've been referring to it recently. Yeah, in short, we've known, right, that we've just come out of, thankfully, a pretty rough droughty stretch, a pretty rough stretch of, I mean, think, was it all the way now back in 2017 was that heat dome? When was that? Time is flying, but those impacts are have been noted by Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife as well as the Forest Service to have long stretches of main stem rivers fully desiccated by late August into September. Redband trout that would hold in the deepest of pools in a number of tributaries of the Crooked River were found high and dry, just a skeleton, a pool full of skeletons on river rock, freshwater mussels lost in massive stretches, unfortunately, through some of those droughts. So it's definitely all playing out right here, right now. We're seeing some rather stark, not unprecedented, but stark challenges there, and that's where trying to do more of the stage zero work in Wychoose Creek, or we're doing that type of method in the Crooked River Basin and beyond, upper Deschutes, trying to increase the sponge, hydrate more sponge, if you will, that floodplain habitat to be able to hold on to water up in these wet meadow systems in that really porous volcanic soil. That's really the key to just buy ourselves time through these, long stretches of climatic stress.
Sorry, I was going to just wrap it up for you.
Okay, go for it. I was just going to wrap it up too.
Hey, I
So-
just wanted to thank, round of applause for our presenters tonight. Thank you so much. Or you want the next? Oh, Lisa will maybe tell you what's coming next.
Yeah, I wanted to just let you all know that we're going to pivot for our summer season, and we're going to go outside of the formal seminar with the bright light in our eyes, and we're going to go out to see the sun, and we're going to see some stuff on the ground. So if you're interested in learning more about irrigation modernization and farming in general and the tools in the toolkit that we're using to restore flows, we're going to have a tour, I believe it's going to be June 11th, where we're going to see both the distribution network, little pieces of it that are getting water from the river to the farms, and then also see a really nice, beautiful farm that is using really very efficient techniques for irrigating a low water using crop, lavender. So that's going to be a great tour. And then we also are planning to take folks out to the upper river to see what you guys were seeing in some of those photos of what the upper river looks like. And that is also going to happen this summer. We're going to get out on boats, so there's going to be some fun stuff. And then we're also hoping to do a tour in the Crooked River as well later in the summer. So stay tuned. Please participate in future Raise the Deschutes events. And thank you for being here tonight. And I'll let Kate take it away.
Well, that's it. Just thank you so much for coming, and we hope to see you again. Yeah.